This is my observation of what a working class MAGA man looks like and thinks like. I've worked in many places driving many forklifts. I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in various picking and packing jobs throughout the Midwest, predominantly in Minnesota, only in Minnesota, really. And Minnesota is considered a pretty, purple state, right? They're blue, but they have a lot of the rural areas, like all of America outside of Minneapolis, tend to be a little bit more red. Here's your typical MAGA man that I've worked with, even in the city of Minneapolis, the surrounding areas, who I saw in the Midwest, and I saw them in other states. I didn't necessarily work with them, but I knew them or socialized with them. The MAGA man, the MAGA man is the working class one, and this is not the rich or the middle class MAGA. Those men are different. I don't know those men. I don't work with those men, or I tend not to. I tend to where I worked with a lot of working class MAGA men. So these are my observations. And this is not critical. This is just the truth. And it's also critical. They tend to be married if they are in a relationship, they tend to be married to a woman that they do not love or care for. That, in fact, that is just the person that allowed them to have sex with them, and they got pregnant. And they have 2 kids who they don't really want to deal with. They don't love. They're not hugely into. At least the man isn't. He was raised in a very tough home himself by usually a father figure who was domineering, or a single mother type, or a mom that the man simply wasn't around, or he was and he was sporadically around. They tend to have grown up, and these are the working class and poor. They tend to have grown up in trailer parks. They tend to have grown up in apartment complexes or rural housing. Like, it's cheaper to rent a house in the middle of nowhere for obvious reasons because of the lack of population. So they perhaps grew up someplace a little bit out on the outskirts of town, or they grew up in apartment complexes around minorities that they weren't huge fans of. They tend to be very uneducated. Most of them had absolutely no college or interest in college, largely due to debt and the way that they reinforced not wanting to go into debt or having to go get a FAFSA or do anything to go to college like that. So they would say that they just didn't have an interest in it, or they just didn't like it, or whatever. When many of them would have probably preferred to go into college, but their family didn't emphasize it, and they certainly, weren't going to go to the steps that would have been necessary to be educated. They are generally into video games, first-person shooters, stuff like that. They know a ton about guns. They know a lot about guns. They know a lot about World War II technology, weapons of war. They tend to like generic video games as well, but generic movies. Like, these are the guys who wear Captain America shirts, right? That with the shield on it, which is just so gauche. It's the only word I can think of. It's so gross. It's so lame. It's so trite. It's so banal to wear like to have some major symbol on your, like people who wear the Green Lantern shit. It's like, good Lord, stop. It's a corporation that's, good. It's not cool. You didn't discover like the comic book or graphic novel and you've got a cool thing on your, I've seen some people do that shit. And I'm like, that's dope. But putting a Superman logo, having it tattooed on your calf, which I've worked with men. Anyway, so fucking Batman. Anyway, but they all like they don't really like the deep stuff. They just kind of say everything is surface level. They lose themselves in video games. They lose themselves in fiction. They don't really read. Not all of them, some do, but most of them don't. They're not interested in reading. Reading has nothing to do with their lives other than at work to read off the Telzon or to read off the RF gun. They are very into the idea of masculinity, but aren't all that masculine themselves, or all that what the idealized version of masculinity is to them. They are not that thing, but they're into that idealized version. They all like Bill Murray for some reason. All those ugly Bill Murray shirts. But anyway, but that's just an aside. But they tend to be they live in a duplex that they rent with their 2 kids that neither were planned, that he inseminated his then girlfriend turned wife while he was drunk twice. And got her pregnant twice. And now he's stuck with these kids that he really doesn't want. And she doesn't really want him or the kids. I always say miserable with your fat wife and your ugly kids. That's MAGA. They would like to drive a truck, but they can't afford it. So maybe they just drive an old rundown car, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of great. I wouldn't buy a new car. I only buy used cars. I have no money. But I'm not MAGA. So if you drive, no judgments here. Or they're super into their truck, where they'll either have an old truck that they do way too much to, or they'll have a new truck that they can barely afford the payments on, or they inherited some money from somebody dying, and then they went and bought the most expensive vehicle that they could afford, the biggest, most expensive vehicle they could afford, and it's always a truck. They're very patriotic. They love the American flag. They'll have even a Blue Lives Matter flag in the back of their truck, but they'll also have a "Don't Tread on Me" sometimes, most times. So the contradiction, of course, is that the people that are going to tread on you are going to be blue lives. They're going to be the cops. That if they ever crack down on you for whatever reason, the first people they're going to send in are the police. And if you think the police are going to all of a sudden gain a conscience because you have an AR-15 or you have a weapon or you're white, why don't you go ahead and ask Ruby Ridge, the fellas there? Why don't you go ask what happened in Waco, Texas? And those are just 2 events we can go point to. Why don't you ask this protester who was just arrested, an American citizen, and deported to El Salvador? Why don't you see how these men of honor, they will follow orders to the end, baby. And if that means trucking through you, that means trucking through you. But anyway, MAGA is their best. They eat the same type of foods. They eat poorly. They enjoy processed crap. They wear all of their patriotism and they like to wear logos and slogans on their shirts and hoodies. Shit that says like snowflake, snowflake zone. That was a big one in 2017-18. Everybody was a snowflake if they opposed, anyway. Or they have whether they served in the military or not, which is always odd. They'll have the image of the guy holding his gun at the gravesite of apparently one of his dead buddies, and it'll say some really dipshitty patriotic nonsense. They're super into patriotism. They're super into the military. They are super into authority and order and authority. They are authoritarian. They love having a strong man tell them what to do, or a strong man who has ideas, finally, who's willing to go out there and put ridiculous tariffs all over the world that are eventually going to hurt MAGA. And it's going to hurt because it'll hurt everyone because of inflation and a multitude of other reasons that we'll go into in later videos. But MAGA's okay with this because Donald Trump made a decisive, bold move. Like Teddy Roosevelt, going up San Juan Hill, like a moment that he can, you saw his press conference. Tariffs are great. They're the best word. It's better than love. It's better than respect. Tariffs. Bold, decisive action. That's what MAGA wants. They want a daddy. They're tired of the subtleties, and because they don't really know how much they benefit from having their government that they hate so much because of Donald Trump. So they want him to decisive actions. And even if it rips everything that they have apart, even if it makes everything you own more expensive, and and makes your cost of living go up. I hope they pay you more at your work, because that usually happens, right? Cost of living increases always everyone gets those, don't they? Oh, they don't. Never mind. So MAGA is also religious, and some are very religious and some are not really religious, but they have a healthy fear of God. Their concept of God is a fear-based one. So they don't really know, they don't have a quote unquote personal relationship with Jesus or any of that stuff. They don't have, they have none of that stuff. They have a fear of God, a fear because wrath is what they like. They like it. They get off on it on some levels of the idea. These, you know the Christians and people who prefer the Old Testament to the New Testament. The New Testament is just too much queer shit. Right? Let's go back to when God carried around a fucking 45 and issued justice, Old Testament style. And it's the MAGA man has tattoos. He and his wife are into tattoos. It's a way of their self-expression that they don't have any other way than other to put ugly dragons and dice rolling on their forearms. Or an eagle. They're very trite people. They're very easily entertained. They are the people that laugh when somebody trips and falls. They laugh when somebody gets hurt. They don't rush to see if the person's okay because they don't have a lot of empathy because they haven't been shown a lot of empathy in their lives. So they don't really, and I'm talking about the older ones. The younger ones suffer from a lack of empathy because of video games and hyperlinks and shit that's developing your brain in a different way. I'm not going to keep guys my age, 48, who we've gone down similar paths in our lives. And these men they're angry and they have deep-seated hate and rage. And people will say, well, Jason, if you just talk to them and you can, because clearly, communicate with these people, express to them what MAGA is and what socialism is. I've done that. And a MAGA man will leave an impression on you in a way that other men will not. When you sit around and talk politics, there's generally people will listen. Some don't care. Some are just like, yeah, no, whatever, man. I don't vote. I don't really, all that shit boring to me. But they don't like MAGA. They don't care. They're ambiguous to be, I guess you would say, or ambivalent. But MAGA wants to square down. MAGA will square up with you. And then MAGA will call you a communist. I worked in this fucking place and they literally called me the little commie. Like I was but not even behind my back because nobody had, and I'm not like probably many people listening. I'm not really bullyable. You're not going to bully me. Like that's not going to happen. I'm not a little wilting flower. I can defend myself verbally, whatever. And so I was, and but it was a form of MAGA bullying me. Or trying to anyway. And again, it wasn't like they were taking dumps on my car when I go, nothing like that. But at work, and they always wanted to say, hey, it's the commie, hey, and they didn't know anything about what I was talking about. And I just remember it was hilarious. And then you'd find a few thoughtful people who would be like, you'd have lunch with, and politics would not be discussed. It would just be their lives, your life, family, friends, work environment. But MAGA never wanted that. MAGA always wanted to square off on something. MAGA always wanted to wear something at their work. I never wore anything political at my work, ever. I'm not wearing Che Guevara shirts and shit around. I'm not, because why would I do that? It would just be stirring the pot that doesn't need to be stirred. We're at work. I don't want to get into this at work. Not MAGA. MAGA wants to get it on at work. MAGA will wear a MAGA hat, a fucking Trump sweatshirt, and they will walk around with their chest pumped out like he's them, and they are him. He is them, and they are him. And that's a MAGA man, a MAGA working class man now. And they are a danger to themselves and others, frankly. And they're getting all of this decisive action from their God King, Donald Trump, their leader. And it's going to hurt them even worse because they never want to discuss what the real issues in America are. And that's, of course, capitalism and economics. The MAGA man wants nothing to do with an economics discussion because he doesn't understand it. He doesn't know debt-based currency. He doesn't know what the Fed is. He doesn't know what anything does. So he will continue to blame the other, be a racist, and wear his MAGA shit proudly. And that's fine with him because being ignorant is blissful. Thank you for listening. Don't be a MAGA man.